Hey everyone, and welcome. Today's explainer is incredibly profound. We are diving deep into the powerful concepts presented in the book Adhunikta ke Vikrit Mapdandon ko Badla Jai. In English, that translates to distorted standards of modernity and the crisis of decency. Now, I want to be super clear right up front. This content is based entirely on the original Hindi literature by Pandit Sriram Sharma Acharyaji. We're going to take a really close, strictly textual look at a major crisis affecting society today, which the author describes as the erosion of human dignity disguised as modern advancement. It's a fascinating perspective, so let's get right into it.
Here is the roadmap for our explainer today. We'll be moving through 6 key areas. First, the true meaning of progress. Second, Western influence and vulgarity. Third, historical causes of decline. Fourth, the irony of modern society. Fifth, animality versus divinity. And finally, rebuilding society with decency. Section 1. True meaning of progress, beyond materialism. So, you know how modern society usually measures progress, right? We tend to look purely at technological leaps or outward displays of freedom or just accumulating more stuff. But the source literature argues something entirely different. It says that true progress should be strictly defined by the excellence of our thoughts, the strength of our character, and our inherent decency. According to the text, a lot of what we celebrate as modernity today is actually masking a tragic loss of morality and a pretty rapid descent into vulgarity. It's basically saying we've traded our internal character for a cheap imitation of progress. The literature captures this conflict perfectly with a core question posed by the author. Quote, "What is the use of so-called progressiveness achieved by losing decency, gentleness, and character loyalty?" End quote. It's a really heavy question when you think about it. The text is arguing that if all this outward advancement comes at the cost of our internal human dignity, well then that so-called progress is completely meaningless. Section 2. Western influence and vulgarity. The illusion of advancement. To really understand this, the text establishes a very clear, uncompromising baseline for what vulgarity actually is. It defines it by stating that every object, thought, or behavior is vulgar if it directly or indirectly points the human mind towards shamelessness. The author asserts that shamelessness can never, under any circumstances, be a measure of a modern or civilized society. Instead, it's viewed as a corruption of our higher self. So it's not just about what you wear or say. It's about the direction it pulls your mind. This brings up a really fascinating contrast in cultural paradigms highlighted in the book. On one side, you have the traditional Indian view of morality, which is described as highly elevated, pure, and intensely focused on preserving inner character. On the flip side, the text observes that in many Western paradigms, open displays of shamelessness, whether that's in media, art, or everyday behavior, are ironically celebrated as being progressive and liberated. The book really challenges the reader here, asking us to step back and question whether everything imported from other cultures is actually an upgrade for our own. Section 3. Historical causes of decline, a chronology of erosion. Okay, let's take a quick look back in time, because the author outlines a very specific historical timeline regarding this moral shift. Back in the ancient era, art, literature, and sculptures were completely pure. They were meant strictly for the higher education and spiritual elevation of mature minds. But then, as we moved into the Ritikala era, things shifted. Royal courts and wealthy elites started indulging in lower, indecent poetry and art just for cheap entertainment. The text argues this indulgence fundamentally weakened the ruling class. And, ultimately, during the British era, this internal moral weakness was exploited through a deliberate, targeted psychological attack on the character of the general public. The original literature uncovers this specific colonization strategy brilliantly. The author notes, quote, "To make their rule thornless, the British wanted to diminish the moral strength of the Indians." End quote. By actively promoting base entertainments, loosening social rules, and eroding the traditional moral framework, the text asserts that the population was literally weakened from the inside out. The book argues that once a society loses its moral high ground, it becomes incredibly easy to control. In that sense, moral decline became the heaviest chain of slavery. Section 4. The irony of modern society, the unwanted sickness. The author points out that this crisis has infected almost every area of our daily lives. Just look around. Literature is flooded with cheap, indecent novels. Cinema relies heavily on vulgar shock value and degrading songs. Even art has stooped to inappropriate depictions of revered deities and historical ideals. And broadcast media,
It constantly bows to indecent demands. The text uses a really striking metaphor for this. It says that just as a traveler walking through a dirty alley is forced to tolerate the terrible stench, decent people today are forced to endure this intellectual garbage while simply trying to live their normal lives.
And do you know who gets hit the hardest by this distorted landscape? The youth. According to the literature, they are the absolute biggest victims here. The author notes that instead of being nourished by elevating ideas and strong, decent role models, young people are hungrily consuming indecent literature. They're replacing pure character-building habits with vulgar film songs. It's heartbreaking because they are being negatively shaped during their most formative years by a cultural environment that literally profits off their psychological degradation.
Section 5, Animality versus Divinity, the ultimate choice. The literature draws a really categorical boundary when analyzing human behavior. It breaks it down into two paths. First, there's animality, which is described as slavery to base, lustful desires. It's stagnant, it's indecent, and it pulls human consciousness sharply downward. On the other hand, you have divinity, which represents upward-moving tendencies, decent creation, and absolute purity. The text argues that engaging in vulgarity isn't just a matter of having bad taste, it is a literal descent into animalistic behavior. Choosing decency, however, is the path to true divine consciousness. The author actually explains the psychological mechanism behind how this spreads through society. Quote, "Intense human emotions are highly infectious. They quickly establish contact and awaken similar vulgar feelings in others." End quote. It's like a giant ripple effect. The book argues that bad thoughts spread like a highly contagious disease. When vulgarity is normalized by just one person, it ripples outward, waking up dormant lower instincts in others. And very quickly, it can turn a civilized society into a herd driven purely by lower instincts. Section 6. Rebuilding Society with Decency. The Path to True Progress.
So how do we actually fix this? The book doesn't just leave us with the problem, it gives us actionable, concrete steps for spiritual and societal elevation. Step 1, reject the infectious vulgarity completely from your life. Seriously, do not consume it and do not tolerate it. Step 2, take a firm pledge to elevate your own inner tendencies through strict personal discipline and higher thinking. And step 3, give honest, decent emotions a real chance to manifest in your daily life. The text beautifully reminds its readers that decency isn't some forced rule. It is actually the natural human state. But the author asserts that this responsibility doesn't just lie with us as individual consumers. The literature speaks directly to the gatekeepers with this powerful statement, quote, "It is the moral responsibility of those controlling literature, art, and media to stop the psychological degradation of society." End quote. The author is directly urging influencers, creators, and media moguls to stop exploiting base desires for a quick profit, and instead use their immense platforms to awaken goodwill and higher human thought. And that brings us to the final takeaway of today's explainer. The literature leaves its readers with this profound conclusion. True progressiveness lies solely in being rich in character and building others up, not in vulgar displays that promote animalistic tendencies. The author challenges every single one of us to protect our inner decency, framing it as the absolute foundation of human dignity. So, based on Pandit Sriram Sharma Acharyaji's incredible text, I want to leave you with this final thought. What deliberate step will you take today to ensure your mind and your character keep moving upward?